Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've got quite a few people that are kind of popping in here at the last minute, so we're going to give it just another minute or so to let a few others join in, and then we will get started. And of course, as soon as I say that, now I don't see anyone else joining. So let's go ahead and get going. So again, thank you all for joining. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Brian French. I'm the manager of client success here at Anchor. We've got JC Dobbs, our director of strategic services, and we have Salim Youssef, who is product specialist for Control One. Super excited to have you guys join us for this, and really looking forward to kind of walking through what this product can do to help better secure your network, your environment. If you think back to kind of the old days, which really wasn't that long ago, everything really lived in one place, right? We had a physical office and desktop computers and physical servers all sort of living in one place. Everything was on one connected network, and there's a firewall sitting in front of that network that bridged the gap and protected the environment from the internet. And really, it was about just making sure that that firewall was properly secured and in place. And for the most part, everything was good. And that's just not the world that we live in today, right? It's a very different model for pretty much everyone these days. People work from home, they're traveling, they're working remotely, they're in the unsecured Wi-Fi environments at coffee shops, hotels, all of those sorts of things. Um, Home networks that we don't really have any control over and don't know how secure those may or may not be. And so how do we protect that? How do we keep you safe and keep those devices safe and still give you the connectivity regardless of where you're at? And so that's really what this product does for us. It solves a lot of problems that we've been asked a lot about recently. The home network security comes up a lot. The traveling user that's connected to, the Starbucks Wi-Fi, the hotel Wi-Fi. How do we know if they're safe? Should we be on a VPN, et cetera, et cetera? And so, again, super excited to bring this to you guys. And I'll kick it over here to Solomon in just a second and let him walk through and give you an overview of what this product does. If you have any questions as we go through this, very informal, obviously, as we go through this. So we've got you on mute for now, audio wise. We'll open that up at the end if anybody wants to actually ask a question verbally. But in the meantime, if you have any questions as we're going through this, feel free to put them in the chat. We will keep an eye on those and address them as we walk through. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Solomon and let him show you guys the product.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time that everyone is going to put into this meeting today. Like Brian said, I'm Salim Youssef. I'm one of the product specialists here with Control One. We'll talk about a few things. Brian started kind of setting the stage there for how things have been changing, and change really is everywhere, and it's constantly happening. So what we're doing in the world of security is trying to stay one step ahead of those changes and protect you from what the bad guys are doing before they do it to you. Of course, we'll talk a little about how Control One works and how it helps solve a lot of these problems. And to Brian's point, questions, anything that pops into your mind, go ahead and put them in that Q&A, and we'll try to get to them as we move through the presentation, or obviously in the Q&A session afterwards. So we all know that the demands on the network and demands on workforces have changed dramatically over the years. like Brian was saying, you've got remote work. There are people are working outside of the office. You've got data that's now in the cloud that's no longer being protected by that traditional firewall. But some of the things we'll kind of take a little bit of a step back and look at how things have progressed over the last few years, in the last decade or so, in terms of viruses and malware and some of the things that you all hear from the anchor team and stuff you see out on the news. If you rewind the clock not that long ago, the bad guys, when everything was in the office, the bad guys had one way into your network and into your sensitive information, and that was through the firewall. So they spent a lot of time, a lot of energy hacking through firewalls. When they did get through, they deposited malware. And back then there was a little bit of money involved in malware and ransomware, but it wasn't the cash cow that it is today. So it was more enjoyment, right? They got you with malware. We all remember the days of the thousand pop-ups and you feverishly clicking away trying to get those pop-ups off your screen before someone saw that you did something. Ultimately, you take your take your laptop or computer to the IT folks. They fix it up. They give it back. Minor inconvenience, but not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. The bad guys don't hack through firewalls anymore because an IT industry, we strengthen the firewalls to make it you know darn near impossible to get in through the firewall side. So they're no longer doing that. They realize that people were the weakest link, and we've said this for decades, that the user, the end user, is the weakest link in the equation. The bad guys have caught on to that, and now they're trying to hack through the people because it's the easiest way to get into your network and gather that data, gather that information that they're looking for. Malware is still a thing, but we don't see the million pop-ups that we used to see back in the day because now malware is the hidden element of security breaches. Right, the malware that's deposited sits silently on your network for days or weeks or months, collecting and harvesting information, seeing all the websites that you go to, collecting those username and passwords, mining their way through the organization and getting into other computers with admin rights and being able to get some of your company secrets and client information, payroll information, those types of things. They're still depositing malware, right? But now the pain that we feel on the outside, right, that cut on the skin, is the ransomware. Oh, my computer's locked up. You pay the ransom. Hopefully, you've got the right backups in place and you've done the right thing so you don't have to pay the ransom. The problem, though, is when you get malware, after you've seen the ransomware, the malware has taken all of your crown jewels. They've taken all the data already, and the ransomware is just a cut that you now have to deal with. But the information that's been stolen, the company records, the data, the fact that you have to alert your customers, the downtime that that's being caused by this is ultimately what takes businesses out of the picture. It's not just the ransom; it's the information that's being stolen. I had a partner come to me last year or so with a law firm that had been hacked, and they were looking for a better solution. And it turned out when they did their forensics on the network, they the hackers were in the network long enough to realize that the day that the ransomware popped up was payday, and the ransom happened to be exactly 2 months of payroll to the penny. So they were in the network, seeing everything that was going on, knowing that today was an important day and that the business had enough money to pay that amount of ransom to get their rest of the employees paid and do everything else, right? That's a simple, you know, analogy there, but this stuff happens all the time in way grander schemes. So we're trying to protect you from things like that. The traditional firewall, right, that appliance that Brian was talking about that typically sits on site and protects the walls of the castle. That's what it was designed for. Keep the bad guys out. But when you're inside of the kingdom, right, the people aren't necessarily enforced. They can move about, go in any of the rooms, do anything they want. Now that the people have moved outside of the office, that firewall's not protecting them anymore. To facilitate the work outside of the office, we had to move a lot of the documents and the things that the people were working on outside of the office as well. Think of your financial service applications, your line of business app, your CRM, right? That stuff used to be on a server inside protected by the firewall, but now it's in the cloud, right? It's a SaaS application, or you've moved your data storage from the server to Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. The traditional firewall appliance in this new world of work does not protect the business anymore. It protects the office, but 50, 60, 70, maybe 100% of the work is now happening outside of the office. So we've got to do something different to protect our network environments. There's some really cool stats on here that a lot of folks don't realize. I talk to clients regularly with our partners who say that I'm not in the cloud because they don't feel like they're in the cloud. But when you dig in a little bit, are they using Google or Office documents and Excel Online or Microsoft 365? Where are they storing their documents? Is it in OneDrive or Dropbox? Oftentimes, the answer to those questions is yes. And if the answer is yes, it means you are in the cloud. And that means anyone that has your username and password can get access to your data as well as you. So we've made it easier for you to be able to work. It's also become a lot easier for the bad guys to get into your network because you've made your network available in the cloud. Remote work, data in the cloud ultimately means your attack surface, which your attack surface for folks, not trying to talk cyber, but your attack surface is really anywhere that an unauthorized person can gain access to sensitive data, right? Financial records, personally identifiable information, employee records, confidential confidential products, sales information. Think about where you store this information now. That's your attack surface. And because your attack surface is much wider than it has traditionally been, you're more vulnerable, right? You're more at risk for things to go wrong. You've got a lot more ways to be compromised. So you've probably heard from Brian and the Anchor team of protection in layers. We've done this for quite some time of adding a layer of security on to the next layer to make sure that we've got the protection. If a bad guy gets through one layer, there's typically another layer behind that to stop them from getting in. Some of the layers that probably resonate with most of you on this call are things like complex passwords. We all remember the days of having to change our passwords every 60 days. And then it was you had to change it and it couldn't be one of your old passwords and it had to be X number of characters or it had to have a special character. Then it was a long security phrase. We've done all these things to improve passwords, but passwords are 100% ineffective nowadays. One of my favorite stats from a survey back in 2022 is that there are 24 billion with a B username and password combinations for sale on the dark web. Now let that number process in your head for a minute, because some of you are probably thinking like, there's only 8 billion people on the planet, and a lot of countries don't even have computers. So when you start doing the math, that's 4 or 5 usernames and passwords for every employee, every user that has a computer. 4, 5, 6 different passwords and emails are available for sale. So the bad guys are taking this information and using it to get into Microsoft 365 and into Salesforce and into your CRMs and into your SaaS applications because they literally can just log in because the information is widely available. So what do? Right? Many of you are probably familiar with multi-factor authentication. This was the holy grail of locking down access. Let's give the users a secondary form of validation, whether that's a code that gets emailed or texted to them or a multi factor authenticator app. Bad guys, of course, have caught on to that as well. And multi-factor authentication is being spoofed. Text messages are being spoofed. It's SIM swapping. All of these things that the bad guys have figured out how to do to get the multi-factor authenticator code. Something else that's happened recently, and as of last year, I think about 19% of the data breaches that happened globally were something called a token replay attack. That's where a bad guy takes your password, email combination, and the token that's created when you put in a legitimate multi-factor authentication code into a legitimate website. And they take that token and instantly use it again. When they do that, they're not prompted for validation. They have a legitimate token to get into any of your websites. So multi-factor authentication can now be bypassed as well. I was reading an article today about the bad guys using AI and machine learning to take all of this data that's released on the internet, right? You think of the brands that you see on the screen. A lot of companies think that, hey, the big companies are being attacked. I'm too small to be a victim. I'm too small for them to be a target. But in reality, when you think of all these companies that are losing data in a cyber breach, whose data do they lose? They're losing our data, right? I had last week, I had three different cyber breach notifications from three different companies, all offering me the 1 year of identity threat protection, which is interesting because back in the day it used to be credit card offers that came in like that. Now it's you've been breached and you need to protect yourself. So when these big companies are losing information, they lose our information, and the hackers are using AI and machine learning and reinvesting the profits that they get from ransomware to make their hacks better. They're using ChatGPT to build phishing schemes that look legitimate. There's deep fakes now that where they're calling you and leaving a message or talking to you in a voice of someone that you recognize. They're getting smarter and smarter, so you have to do something very different to protect yourself. Something else that's come up over the last few years, it's become very prevalent, is the use of VPNs, virtual private networks. A lot of people think that, oh, I'm using a VPN, I'm secure. And that's simply not true. There's really two types of VPNs that people are familiar with, right? The ones for work that give you remote access. I need to print when I'm at home, or I need to get this file from the file server. The other one that most people are familiar with are the ones for personal use and play, right? The ones that mask your identity and allow you to come from different locations. Both of these models are incredibly bad for business. The latter, right, the privacy ones, give you a very false sense of security because they're not security tools. They're just encrypting your traffic and making you feel safe, but you're not. The former, the ones that we use for work, we've shown in the data and the surveys that have come back, as more people were using VPNs for work, more cyber breaches happened. And it's not because of brute force or the bad guys hacking VPNs. It's bad guys simply getting these username, password credentials, spearphishing an individual and getting into the corporate networks, literally riding the tails of the VPN into the corporate network. I put a stat on the screen, and a brand that probably everyone in the world recognizes to some way, shape, or form, right? Cisco. They are a powerhouse in networking and security. And even a big company like this was breached because one of their employees, think about this and think about your employees, one of their employees stored the username and password to their VPN in Google Password Manager on their browser. Browser password managers don't store data, or they do store data in plain text. So when your browser gets corrupted, the bad guys now get access to all that password information. And this individual had a Cisco VPN password stored and led to a breach at Cisco. I'm telling you all this not to scare you. This is what's happening out in the real world. These are things that we deal with at Control One. These are things that the folks at Anchor deal with their customers regularly that are happening out there. So what we have to do as an industry and as businesses is protect ourselves better and ultimately protect the whole business, not just the office with that traditional firewall. There's a new model of security that's wrapped around software defined networking instead of hardware defined networking that allows you to restrict data and restrict access to the data, whether it's on site, whether it's in the cloud, wherever the data lives, you're able to protect access to the data. Right? It's important to secure the worker where they work, not just when they're in the office, but if they decide to set up shop in a coffee shop, or they need to go work from a client's office on a network that you're unsure of, or they need to work from home, you have to protect them wherever they work. And because the threats continue to evolve and security needs continue to evolve and the bad guys continue to get better at their game, security has to be always on, has to be real time, has to be updated and ever present everywhere that you go. And a traditional model of security, updating hardware, you don't get the next update till the next day. That means you've got a day where you're missing out on all the vulnerabilities that were detected the day prior. We built a model that revolves around a cloud-based architecture and a firewall in the cloud. So instead of connecting back into the office, needing to update or manage a piece of hardware that's on site, we are taking care of and managing a cloud firewall that keeps you protected and your employees protected everywhere that you go. One of the main tenets of this cloud firewall is a dedicated static IP address for your business. It's not shared with anyone else. Data is not transferred amongst different clients. You get this dedicated cloud instance with a static IP that you can then use to go and lock down access to your resources. And I'll talk about that here in a second because that is a really big one of locking down access. Something else that you get with the cloud firewall, right, is um, is this prioritization that's happening. Normally, when you have an on-premise appliance, that machine on site creates a bottleneck. The more inspection you tell it to do, the longer the lines are. Think about border control, because that's really what a firewall is a border control agent. If you are going across the border and we're just looking for, licenses and passports today, the line can move very quickly. But if it's a code yellow, right, and we need to look in trunks and look underneath the car, now the inspection takes a lot longer, the lines are a lot longer, and you create that bottleneck. Because of the cloud architecture in Control One that's always scalable and grows based on your needs, you don't get that bottleneck that happens. Your traffic is prioritized up to the data center. And because most people are connecting to things on the internet, right? They're not connecting back to the office in a lot of cases. Instead of routing back to the office, we send you directly to the cloud. So your transmission is a lot smoother and easier. There's multiple points of redundancy built into the system. When you're relying on hardware, if the hardware is offline for whatever reason, snowstorm comes through and the power is out in town, your office is down, your firewall is down, your security is down. In a cloud model, we have redundant architecture, we have backup power, we have all of the things to make sure that systems are running all the time. And if a location is offline, all your users running Control One are still protected and still secured by the corporate firewall in the cloud. It's always current and up to date. This is really important because if anyone scans anything, right? If I click on a bad link in the morning and you're a Control One customer, you are protected from what I clicked on earlier in the day because of that power of the cloud architecture. We've got real-time intelligence coming in from multiple security engines. So we're always up to date on the latest threats, the zero-day threats, and the emerging threats that are happening out on the market. So you're always protected from the instant that it hits the signatures. In the office and out of the office doesn't matter anymore with a solution like this. Think about that. There doesn't need to be an in the office or out of the office. If your employees can work in the most secure way from where they want to work, right? Whether it's the desk at home or the coffee table or the coffee shop, they can work the way they want to work and be secured. And the security policies, the content filtering policies, maybe you don't want them to be able to go to social media or gambling websites, or maybe you only want them to go to the business sites that you know are destined for work. You could build all those rules, and wherever they're working, they are following those rules in inspection. And the general premises of this, right, is the firewall is everywhere, yet it's nowhere. It follows you around everywhere that you go, but you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get back into the control of the firewall. You literally open your laptop and start working. I started talking about the static IP address, and I want to circle back to the importance of that static IP address and cloud resources, right? I was talking earlier, most businesses have moved their resources to the cloud, whether that's a line of business app, financial planning software, their CRM, um, Microsoft 365 just for docs and document management. It's important to get a grasp and control around these resources, but it's very difficult to do that when your people are working from anywhere. With Control One, you have a virtually central location through that Control One cloud instance that I was talking about earlier. Because of that static IP, the anchor team can use that static IP to lock down access to your cloud applications. So even if your user literally gave away their username and password and MFA token to a bad guy, the bad guy still could not log in to Microsoft 365, even though they had all the credentials, because they can't come from our Control One IP address unless they're validated in the system. Think about how powerful that is. There's the number of attacks that happen every day on Office 365 can all go away by locking it down to a single IP. This protects your data where it lives and gives you access, but not anyone else access that shouldn't be in the system. So we talked a lot about the cloud firewall and the protection that's happening at that cloud layer that follows you around. But let's talk now about how you get into that cloud firewall. There's an agent that runs on your laptops and desktops and phones and tablets. So any device that you would use or your employees would use to interact with for work purposes should get the Control One agent. That's going to secure that user and secure the endpoint wherever they go. We're looking at user identity, not necessarily the device. So we're going to look and say, this is John from accounting, and as a member of the accounting team, John has these security permissions. He can get to these websites and he can talk to this server. JC in the marketing department doesn't need access to these servers because why would she need access to the accounting servers? She doesn't need that to do her job, so she shouldn't have access to that. So we're looking at that user identity and what their roles are in the business, and then allocating the rights for access based on what they need. What that ultimately means, going back to the attack surface, is it minimizes your attack surface and closes it down to reduce the risk you have in your business. One of the things that our customers love about Control One is that it's designed to be invisible to the user. Think about that. Most every other security tool that you're going to see causes you to jump through another hoop to get to work. It's another step, another login, another authenticator app, another something else to get into what you need to do. And a lot of people are resistant to that change. Think about multi-factor authentication, how many kind of people pushed back on it for such a long time because it was another step. We made Control One invisible to the user, right? You can build rules to where they never have to log into it except for that first time. It's always on. It's connected. If you've got folks that are click happy and like to click on tools and turn things off, we can stop all of that from happening as well. It runs in the background, so the user doesn't have to do anything to get into the system in the morning besides open their laptop and log into the machine. Once they're logged into the machine, if you had access to the server and you had access to the printer and these security policies, those things follow them around everywhere they go. Something else that's very important that we talked about is protecting on the the network environments that the user is on. Right? We know the coffee shop and the hotel Wi-Fi and the airport are bad, right? And we've told people to not connect to those public Wi-Fi environments. Use your hotspot. We all know this. Everyone slips up and does it. Even us in the security world, we slip up and connect to public Wi-Fi when we're not supposed to. The home network is probably the most dangerous because that's where people feel safe. I'm at home. It's a trusted network, but there are no trusted networks. When you think about the home network, it's flat and wide open. Every device can talk to everything else. All your IoT devices, the kids' PlayStations, the smart refrigerator, all of those things are like chatty teenagers. They're all talking to each other, waiting for someone to respond to initiate a conversation. What we do with Control One is something called Wi-Fi protection. And Wi-Fi protection basically is going to not respond to all of that chattiness that's happening on the network. So the computer or phone or tablet that's running Control One is going to be invisible on that home network or on that coffee shop or on that airport Wi-Fi, and nothing else can talk to it, which means it's protected on the network that it's plugged into. The traffic is encrypted up to that data center, and all all of it goes through the firewall as well before going out to the internet. So lots of security wrapped around the user itself, the device, and the transmission of the data across that device. One of the things that we are starting to see a lot more with different industries are compliance requirements. Right? We've got the CMMC and HIPAA and PCI and ITAR and all these other acronyms that the folks like to throw out at us. You may or may not be covered by a compliance requirement, but we're also starting to see a lot more cyber insurance requests coming to our partners, because the cyber insurance companies, right? We all know insurance companies. They're in the business of deferring risk. The cyber insurance form is the cyber insurance company's way of deferring risk and pointing the blame back to someone else if and when something goes wrong. So you've probably noticed that your cyber insurance forms used to be a one-page check the box. Then it was a two-page check the box. Now it's a 10 or 15 page fill out the form and put in lots and lots more information. And what they're doing is, if and when a breach happens, they're going to go back to this form and figure out what you weren't doing that you said you were, so that they don't have to pay out your insurance premium. One of the things that is on every single insurance form that I see is, do you have antivirus software installed on your computer? And this is the gotcha that the insurance companies use, because overwhelmingly, everyone has some form of antivirus software on their computer. The challenge is, how do you enforce that antivirus software is on and running when that user is in the network? Did it crash when the computer started? Did the user get click happy and cause the program to fail? Did they turn it off because it was blocking them or slowing them down from doing something? Or did malware turn it off in an attempt to spread further? These are all things that can happen in the real world. And if that does happen to happen and you have a breach, the insurance company is going to come back and say, it's not our fault. We can't cover you. You didn't do X, Y, and Z. One of the things we do in Control One is compliance enforcement. So we can make sure that the things you've told the insurance company that you're doing, disk encryption is on there, multi-factor authentication, antivirus is on and running. We'll actually make sure that these processes are running as a requirement for access into the network or to stay in the network. So JC may already be connected into the network, but if her antivirus software fails, we'll detect that. And instead of letting her have access and continue browsing around the network, potentially spreading malware, we'll quarantine her and put her into an isolation zone that can be as limited or open as you want it to be. So don't think of us coming in and locking you down and not allowing you to work. It's more about protecting you from a potential vulnerability. You can still work, but maybe you don't have access to the software, but you can still browse the internet. All right. The anchor team is going to be there to resolve these things as soon as it happens. But on the flip side, if you were compromised, it's not spreading around your business anymore. It's really important. Part of that zero trust mentality is limiting who has access to what. In the event of a breach, the containment is there. It can't spread across the entire organization. You know, any questions so far from anyone that's come in?
No questions yet from Q&A. One thing though that we tend to get a lot of is, let's say you have, I'm at a hotel, you have to log in before it allows you to have access to the internet, which then potentially allows this platform to connect. How does that scenario work? Will it allow somebody through? When does Cytracom or the Control One connect?
Yeah, I travel quite often for work, do lots of trade shows and events, and I'm at Hilton's and Marriott's and lots of other hotel chains, and have not run into a problem with the captive portal. So typically the agent is logged in, and those captive portals, that splash page that you get to type in your room number and last name, is still served up. So we're protecting you before you even get to that splash page.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Geldart, I saw you had your hand up. I'll unmute you or allow you to unmute if you have a question. Or you can type it in. Oh, great question. So how do you handle offline work? So for example, you know, a lot of people that are on a flight, limited, no Wi-Fi, how does that work?
They could still, if they've got offline documents, you know, things like that, we're not locking down the computer. We're locking down the computer's access to the internet, because the bad things are on the internet, and we're locking down the security around the access to the internet. So if they're on a plane or they're doing offline work, that all still functions normally on the endpoint itself. This
Okay.
platform is designed to not interfere with the user workflows too much. Go ahead, Brett.
Okay. I'm sorry. May I clarify this? Usually there's an authentication process that has to happen in the, you know, that you have to go on, you have to go out to the internet and authenticate through, say, a Wi-Fi on the airplane.
Mhm.
Can that all occur before actually being able to connect into your system?
Yes. In most cases, you still connect normally. We're trying to connect, so we're looking for that internet connection to establish. And as soon as that connection is established, so when you get on the plane should still serve up its splash page to connect into. You have, you know, hotel or airplane Wi-Fi. It connects, and Control One connects right away. So before you start browsing, as soon as that connection to the internet is established, we basically start routing all the traffic through our tunnel to the cloud firewall. Did that answer your
Great.
question?
Yeah, I want to, I'm just more, I've tried some of these products, and that's the biggest challenge, is that authentication process has to go in and out before you get to the internet, and you
Mhm.
can't do that, but it sounds like you've kind of worked through that
We've worked through most
issue.
of it. There are certain planes that have, I'll get slightly technical for a minute. Their splash page is served up internally, not on the internet. And in those cases, because we're trying to get out to the internet, you have to turn off the same thing like private relay on your iPhone. A lot of the planes now tell you you have to turn off private relay to get to their plane Wi-Fi to work. Very similar to where if the DNS is being served, if the splash page is being served from a local IP address on the plane, those are the instances where you'd have to turn it off first. If it's being served out on the internet, then you don't have to.
Turn off what?
The
What would you
Control
turn
One
off?
agent. It would be
So
the Control One agent. Well, on your iPhone, it would be the VPN.
no, and so but I guess that's where I was headed. This is, you'd have to disable the control unit. So does that simply mean the user has the ability to turn it on off? It's not locked.
If you give them the ability. So there are controls in the system to where they can pause
Okay.
or disconnect or log out. So that pause is just like on your iPhone, where pause for 1 minute, pause for an hour, things like that. Where you've got how this all works together is when you lock down access to, I'll use Microsoft and Office 365. When you lock down access to Office 365 through the Control One IP, when the user has the agent turned off, if they have the ability to turn it off at all, they can't get to Office 365. So it forces that mentality of, I need to have this thing on in order to do my work, get my email, do the things I need to do. So if they do have the ability to turn it off or pause the connection, it will turn back on automatically. Or if it's not on, the user ends up being trained to say, I need this on to do anything for work. So they inherently turn it back on. And that's, again, if they have the ability to turn it off at all.
Great
Any
question,
other
Mike.
questions? Yeah, very good question.
I don't have anything else in the queue.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll talk about the other side. 'Cause we talked a lot about protecting the user wherever they are working, right? Because the protecting the employee is very important. But many of you have offices and you have equipment at the office. You may have servers that are still on site, phones, camera systems, IoT devices, and things like that that need protection. So in the world of Control One, we have a hardware appliance as well that can go in the office and protect the office. This puts all of those IoT devices and the things you can't run an agent on behind that cloud firewall. What the box is doing is essentially creating a secure tunnel up to that cloud firewall that all of the traffic routes through. When I think of a product like Control One, I like to link it back to like residential housing and follow me on this analogy. Um, with a traditional firewall, right? It's like living in a traditional residential neighborhood. The firewall is designed to protect the four walls of your home, and it's essentially your front door or front gate. With that type of a model, the bad guys and the solicitors are coming through your neighborhood, driving down your street, parking in your driveway, walking up your front walkway, and knocking on your front door. The firewall, border control, says you're not allowed to be here, turn around and go away. When you think about that type of a model, that bad guy is standing at your front door. He's very close to your sensitive information. And the firewall hopefully has done its job and turned it away. But if there's misconfigurations, holes poked in the firewall, things like that, the bad guy can get in. Control One is like moving into a gated community. In a gated community, all the threats and the solicitors and all the folks using ways to get the shortcut home, they can't drive through your neighborhood anymore. So now all of the threats are kept further away from you. Your streets are wider, they're more open because you don't have as much traffic that isn't designed for the neighborhood or isn't supposed to be in the neighborhood running down your streets. With Control One, we take advantage of those streets and prioritize your traffic up to the data center. So if you guys have had issues with VoIP phone calls where you lose words or miss things or calls that don't come through properly, Zoom calls where that break up when you share a screen, a lot of times those issues are related to quality, not speed. You call the ISP, they'll tell you need a faster plan because that's what they sell you. But at the end of the day, those issues are related to quality across the system. It's the junk that's on the circuit, right? It's all the extra cars and the trucks that are on the road that's congesting the highway for that voice or video signal to get where it needs to be. In Control One, because you're in that gated community, the streets are available. We can prioritize traffic up to that data center, making sure that voice and video has the highest priority. Something else that you benefit from with a solution like this is internet resiliency. Do any of you guys and gals have second internet connections? Do you think about the amount of downtime that you can tolerate if the internet goes down or when the internet goes down? A lot of times you can get a second internet connection, and that's like a second highway with a different IP address and a different carrier. So you have internet resiliency, but there's a minute of downtime between Comcast and Verizon picking up while the firewall reconfigures and does its thing. In Control One, because of the technology we use, we can use both of those internet connections at the same time. So if you can, if you're on a phone call and Comcast goes down in the middle of that phone call with Control One, if you have a second internet connection, you don't hang up on your customers. Your Zoom sessions don't break. Your inbound connections, your VPNs, all of those things don't break when the internet connection goes down. What that ultimately means for you is there's less downtime when that happens, because we all know the internet goes down for 30 seconds to a minute, and everyone that's in the office, they scamper away from their desk, right? Because there's something going on. That 1 minute of internet connectivity issues could be 15, 20 minutes of lost productivity per employee. So a solution like this, because of that SD-WAN functionality, we can do seamless failover and minimize the disruptions that your staff feels while they're on site. lots of things happening across the system. And a lot of this can seem complex or overly complex, and that, of course, is why the Anchor team is here to help you guys along your journey in technology. At the end of the day, I'm here to kind of explain the difference between a hardware-based solution like we've traditionally put in, and what we've done in the industry is not wrong, right? If we sold a firewall in the past and endpoint security, that's not wrong. It just now is not the right way to protect your business moving into the future. It was the best in class solution. And that is the tools that we had as technology experts to be able to protect you. But because the way work has changed and the way that people want to work has changed, those traditional models don't work anymore. And you have to move into a software defined approach. At the end of the day, the benefits to you as the business owner are ultimately a lower risk profile because we're able to secure your people wherever they go and your data wherever it lives. You are less at risk for being a target, or well, you're always at risk of being a target. You're less vulnerable to that risk because we've locked things down properly. Compliance and security are enforced around the clock in every location. You're able to build out a zero trust, least privileged model that restricts access to those who need it to do their job instead of giving it everywhere. And the best of all, really, is your employees don't have to do anything different. It's not another hoop to jump through, it's not another step that they have to take to get to work in the morning. It's invisible to them. They can't evade security, and you as a business owner are more protected. You can focus on running your business and being more successful there versus thinking about the security risks and the vulnerabilities and all the things that can go wrong. That's where Brian and JC and the Anchor team are here to take that weight off your shoulders and let you focus on what you guys and gals are good at. So that is all that I have for today. I'll pass it back over to Brian, and we can go into any questions and go from there.
That's awesome. Thanks, Salam. Really appreciate that. Great overview of the product. If anybody, again, if you have any questions, either raise your hand, we can unmute you, or pop them into the Q&A. Don't be shy. We've got a little bit of time here. Love to answer any questions that you all might have. One thing that I did want to at least touch on, because I'm sure it's on at least some of your minds, is, all right, how much? what does this cost? And honestly, the short answer is it depends. The different pieces that Solemn went through, some of you would need those, some of you would not. And so it's really not a one size fits all or a one price fits all type model. We've got clients now that literally do not have a physical office, that are 100% remote. And so for those clients, obviously they would not need the appliance that he showed with the dual internet circuit capabilities and those sorts of things. And so the pricing is going to be a little different for a company that does or does not have an office. You may or may not have servers in Azure or AWS or somewhere that we need to connect into and give you access to those. So all of that to say, it really does vary a little from client to client. We will be reaching out. Your client success manager will touch base with you to follow up on the webinar and answer any questions that maybe don't get asked here in this session. Obviously, we can build a pricing schedule for you, for your company individually, and show you exactly what that is so that you know what you're looking at. We do, however, want to at least thank you in some way for taking the time out of your day to attend this and learn more about the product. And so if it is something that you're interested in moving forward with, and you sign up by the end of the year, so before December 31st, you will get 50% off of the monthly fees for the first 3 months. So just a little thank you for taking the time again to sit through this, learn about it, and if even maybe just a chance to try it without having to commit to the full monthly amount if you're not sure if it's something that really makes sense for you or not. So a way to try to do that. Any questions coming in from anyone?
Brian, so there are a couple. Mike asked, do you run this in your own cloud or is it within Azure or AWS? What's the back end?
It's our private data centers.
Your private data centers.
Yep.
And then this one might be more of your technical team, but the question of where's the kernel stack on your tool sit? Is it behind the endpoint and the local antivirus? That might be a subset, or get maybe your technical team in there.
It is, so we're the network access layer. So we're not managing the endpoint, we're managing the endpoint's access to the internet. So we create an overlay network where all the traffic routes out our secure tunnel. So we're in front of the endpoint security.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. The only other question that I had as I'm thinking through, and I know we have some clients that have asked this, is what about like a bring your own device, right? Like I have my mobile phone, but it's my personal mobile phone and I want to still access company data. What does that look and feel like to, employees when it's their device?
Yeah, so with bring your own devices and company owned devices, typically it's going to be the mobile phone, right? Because most businesses are providing the laptop, but it's most oftentimes the mobile phone. The user uses the control one agent more like a VPN to where they have the ability to turn it on and off when they need. So when you're off work doing personal things, you can have the agent on, or sorry, have the agent off. When you need to access your work resources on your mobile device, then you turn the agent on. So in BYOD, you can set a policy that gives the user the ability to turn on and off. On company-owned machines, you would have the agent always on.
Okay.
Yeah, great question.
Braden question about specific kind of, so Braden's company actually already has Control One deployed. And there was an email security issue a few months ago that we made them aware of. So really specifically that, and Solomon had sort of touched on it as he went through his presentation, but one of the things that we see happening, I don't want to say commonly, but more than once, it's becoming a more common occurrence. The ways to work around multi-factor authentication. So I think most of you have heard this from us at one point or another, but the fact that multi-factor authentication tokens don't immediately expire, as Solomon alluded to, that those tokens can be captured and replayed and used by a bad actor, has allowed bad guys access to Office 365 environments even when MFA is fully deployed. If someone sends me a phishing email and I fall for it and I click on the link and it directs me to a site to enter in my username, password in order to gain access to the file that I'm being sent, and then it asks for my multi-factor token, all of that traffic is actually legitimate. I'm actually putting in my real username. I'm putting in my real password. Microsoft is prompting me for the MFA token. It's a valid request. I respond. I confirm that request. But what I'm actually talking to is a server that's sitting in the middle. It's a man in the middle attack or a living off the surface attack. Different names for essentially the same thing, but what they're doing is they're capturing that information and then being allowed to turn around and replay it and gain access to your network. And so this really defeats that because, again, as Solomon mentioned, even if the bad guy were to have username, password, and valid token, if they try to connect from anywhere that's outside of the Control One network, and we've limited access to your Office 365 tenant to only allow logins from that single Control One public IP, they're not going to get in. And so there is huge benefit in that when you look at how many vulnerabilities and how many things that just immediately solves for. Being able to limit your banking websites, your payroll system website, your accounting application to only allow logins from a single IP address. All of the brute force attacks, the login attempts from overseas, all of that just goes away. And so there's a ton of power in that.
No
What
other
else?
questions. I was gonna say that was a great example, Brian. We get that a lot.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we will go ahead and wrap this up. Again, thank you all very much for attending. We really appreciate it. We are recording this. We will make the recording available. So if you have anyone else within your organization that you want to see this, we will have it available. Again, your CSM will reach out to you to follow up and just see what other questions you might have and gauge interest in moving forward with it. But other than that, thank you all very much for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.